In the construction world, you find things all the time that nobody knew about. Sometimes things change, and especially in smaller cities, that maybe it's the first major infrastructure project, and you do all the engineering, you do all due diligence, you do the best you can, and then you get in construction and you run into something that nobody knew was there. Sometimes there are dollars associated with that, and it's never fun. But we were going to hit it no matter what. It was going to be there either way. Sometimes those are the harder conversations. But once the council makes a decision, or once we have direction, I work for y'all. That's in the day. It's not mine. So I do the best I can. I'm here to support you.
Welcome to The Clear Voice, brought to you by Clear Career Professionals. I'm your host, James Groom. With us in studio is the Clear president, Michael Boese. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely, James. I'm happy to be on. And the show that we're going to have today has one of my favorite people that I've met in municipal government. When I started out as a city administrator, it came from the police world, and I needed somebody to be able to teach me so much about cities, involving infrastructure and just how we could provide the highest quality of service to our citizens. And luckily for me, the guest that's coming on came into the picture. In my opinion, just one of those people who has a heart of service, but also one of the smartest engineers that I've met. So I'm really excited to have the conversation with him and what he's been up to and how cities can really improve the overall infrastructure that they have and what to be looking for in the future.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I never thought starting my police career back in the day that I would ever be able to say that I enjoyed meeting an engineer and having conversations with him. Even though he's not working for the municipalities like directly inside as an employee, every time that I've dealt with him, I always thought he was trying to do the best for the city. This episode, we're sitting down with Craig Kerkhoff. Craig's the managing partner at BHC, which is an engineering firm serving municipalities and governments. He brings more than 20 years of engineering experience to the table. His work is focused on municipal engineering, where he helps communities plan, design, and build infrastructure that lasts. As the managing partner, Craig combines technical expertise with leadership and strategic vision to guide projects, mentor teams, and support the long-term success of the firm and the municipalities it serves. Craig, thanks for being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to a good conversation here today.
Yeah, we are as well. Can you talk a little bit about yourself? What led you to engineering and how you came to serve local governments?
Yeah, so engineering, we'll forego the whole history from childhood, but I always just worked outdoors, working on farms, enjoyed it. Engineering was a good path for me. Did a lot of internships while school, inspection, construction management, and just really enjoyed the constructed world. And then being able to put the plans together, seeing how the construction related to that was just really appealing to me. And we did that. And I think you read most of my bio, but generally, yeah, I've been doing this for over 20 years now and feeling like an elder statesman in that regard. I've been here at BHC for about 17 years. I've been an owner/partner for the better part of a decade, maybe 11 years, and the managing partner for the last 2.5. So it's been a bit of whirlwind.
How did you come to like the local government side? Was that, what you were shooting for as you were going through school, or did you at some point in time just run into local government, or did you just happen to wind up there and excelled in it?
That is a fascinating story, and God's will is the short answer. No, I came out of school and I was doing a lot of development work, commercial development, private development. Worked for up in Indiana for a couple of years, and then here in Dallas for a firm. And I enjoyed that world, the fast pace. And then the recession hit, and then I was like many folks, didn't have a job at that point. Very truncated story that's good over lunch is I ended up taking a job in Fairbanks, Alaska, which I hate the cold. We discussed that earlier. And in a roundabout way, a random firm that I'd not really heard much about offered me a position that I'd done a little bit of work for, and the rest is history. Went from not heard of them until they hired me a contract worker, and now I'm the managing partner.
It's funny how those things work out sometimes.
I couldn't have planned if I wanted to, but it's been a blessing, and I love what we do, and I love how we do it, and I can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the firm and what services you guys offer?
Yeah, so we've been around for 57 years. So I'm the fourth managing partner ever in those 57 years. A lot of stability in that regards. And our focus is purely the public sector, mainly municipalities, probably 98%. There is the occasional county or water district will help out, but our main focus is the municipal world. Generally, we're just here in North Texas, We do follow relationships, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But we do a little bit of work in West Texas and down in the Houston area. But that's just established relationships from people we got to know for a long time here in the area. That's our focus. We've got 6 partners that own this firm. They're all active employees here. So we don't have any outside investors, no private equity folks telling us what to do. We're all here. We're all working. In our business model being built for just cities, we run just that way. And I think that makes us special. Knowing that, city finances, they don't have leprechauns or, magic buckets of money. We've got one office. We try to keep our overhead low and respectful of that. I don't have to employ the type of staffs that larger firms or nationwide firms have to employ, with the exception of my 2 accountants. Everybody can produce or work on something for the city in some form or fashion. So that allows us really to focus on the city and not have to pass on the additional costs that aren't a benefit to them, because I've got folks doing things nationwide. So we try to stay focused on that, and that's led to some real good relationships over time. We can do good work for the cities, and we're still a business, and we can still run a good business, but I don't have to be everything to everybody to serve the communities with which we live.
It's always important. Sometimes I see these engineering firms, and they're a little flashy, and the clients are ultimately paying for that flash. And that's one of the things I appreciate about Clear is we keep overhead low. We didn't have a Christmas party, so nobody had to pay for that.
Don't sound bitter at all. Not at all.
No, it's fine.
One thing I do love about our business model, and I think as time goes on, it becomes clear to all the cities, is, just being on the public side, we don't have any of the conflicts of interest. Being a public sector, y'all probably seen, the engineer on one side of the table recommending to the city what they need to do with the city taxpayer dollars and what's in their best interest. And then someone else from the same firm is coming in with a development, trying to negotiate a development agreement that's the exact opposite of what the other guy's telling you. And they tell you they don't talk in the house, but now you're sitting there as a city. Who do you listen to? So we avoiding that. If we're in the room, the city's best interest is our only interest. There's some great private clients out there, I'm certain, but we enjoy working with just the cities, and that's solely the folks that we focus on.
How do you approach those relationships with your clients? And as you work with different size cities, so is it a one size fits all approach, or do you have to kind of tailor that?
It's unique and to every single client. And every client is different and has different resources, experiences, everything from named city engineers to some cities to development reviews and others to projects. So they all need something different. And when it comes to competition, try to be careful not to specifically call out conflicts where I see them at other engineering firms and whatnot. But the cities, they see the value that we bring. All we do is the city work, and we have one office. We're good at what we do. So we have to make sure we stay focused on that, and there's no self-serving or recommendations that we can make that's beneficial to anyway. So that helps build the relationships. But in every city, everything is unique. Everybody's bringing their own past relationships with them, if they have them, own experiences from that job or others. And so really we focus on the relationships, on the people, building those relationships and working together.
It's interesting because, when I was the city administrator down in Wimberley, naturally Craig is up in the North Texas area, but we had a strong relationship, and I'd called and asked him some questions about a wastewater system that had almost been completed when I arrived as city administrator down there, and a couple of other things. Not that he was giving me professional opinions, but he came down and drove all the way down just to visit with me and kind of, talk over some things and how the city could, do the best it possibly could with those projects. When I retired from there and we were starting Clear, naturally, I reached out to people that I respected in the private sector and that had those companies that were doing more than just trying to generate profit. They were really trying to look at impact. Craig was again, supportive of how we could get in and make those relationships and supportive of Clear starting. I think that's, a model that is the secret to success for so many, private sector businesses doing work with cities is this isn't just, getting in and doing a project. It's how do I get in and build that relationship with you and really impact that end user, the person that owns a home that's working hard to support their family and community. How do we make their life better? And I know that Craig, has that vision. I just want to applaud you for that. And, as we're kind of going through this, it's great to see those relationships, not just from Craig's firm, but from so many private sector companies that work with governments.
Well, I appreciate that. And you mentioned a couple points in there, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. I'm the outlier in this one aspect is we don't have revenue goals here at our firm. Engineer, I have a spreadsheet for everything, so I know the numbers, right? But I've worked the other couple of firms I've worked for, the growth, whether it's community served or employees or revenue, When that's a goal, that becomes a focus. Now it's no longer about doing the right thing and the best thing for the client. It's about getting as much or being as much as you can. And I don't want to take the focus off of that relationship, because ultimately that's what's important, right? It's not that one party's taking advantage of the other and they hit a goal this year and they hit January 1 next year, and now it's more, right? And so we do focus on that, but at the same time, Mike, and you've always been very gracious and you're a good friend, is I've always enjoyed creating good relationships with people I work with for a variety of reasons. One, as an engineer, I don't have a lot of friends, right? So there's that. But two, it's when you have a mutual respect, you can have honest conversations or hard conversations or brainstorming conversations. I don't have every answer to every question, and I'm happy to say that. But when there's that mutual respect or underlying trust, you feel more comfortable having just open conversations, right? Versus if it's purely transactional relationship, it's hard to have some of those conversations of, hey, what's the best thing for the city? What's the best thing? How do we approach this? Versus if, hey, you're paying for advice, here's the advice. It changes that dynamic. Mike, James, y'all have my cell phone number, and I love it. Actually, when my office phone rings, no, 50-50 if I answer it or not, because if you're calling the office, I know I don't like you enough to give you my cell phone number. So we enjoy the communication, because at the end of the day, it is the relationships and it is working together. And that's what's best for the communities, and trying to be responsible for, the taxpayer dollars, and helping the cities to do as much as they can.
Thank you, Craig. Can you tell us a little bit about the most common infrastructure issues that are facing your clients across the board, and any thoughts on what cities can do to help themselves in the long term that maybe some aren't doing?
It's a different question for every city, right? We could probably lump two baskets of, smaller cities and larger cities, right? Larger cities, or we'll start with smaller cities. Smaller cities tend to have less staff, right? That's just natural. And with the less staff, you have more hats to wear, right? And a lot of times you don't know what your existing infrastructure even is, right? So before you even get to infrastructure, most smaller towns they're getting by. Nothing seems broken. The tax rate's low, and everybody's happy. They've always lived there. Now growth comes. The developer comes in, and the city doesn't know what they have, and then they negotiate a development agreement that sounds great, and the developer agrees to engineer it and do it, and build it. Everybody's happy, and then later on down the road, they're not really sure if it was the best thing for the city or not. Or maybe in that process, that's where they learned they had deficiencies, was when the growth came in. They didn't even know that, hey, my treatment plants, I'm past the 75/90 rule in the state of Texas, or I've got I&I issues, or I have capacity issues lift station, or I don't have enough elevator. Like, they're not aware of these unless they get a TCQ inspection or told it. So a lot of times smaller cities find infrastructure problems with growth or unintentionally, and they don't know what they have. But they don't have the staff. They have a public works director who's very knowledgeable, been there a long time, but he may not be the right person that's geared towards that growth. On existing infrastructure problems, there gets to be a difficult balance there, where you all and I worked in a city together where they needed to do a lot of work just on the existing system alone, regardless of growth. But then that growth was going to facilitate the starting of those system deficiencies being repaired. So that's one challenge I see in smaller cities as far as infrastructure. The second is, just, staff, and this is across the board. Maybe they've always done a certain rehabilitation one way, so that's all they know. That may or may not be the best way to do it. There could be less expensive ways to do it, whether it's a water line, sewer line, roadway. There could be ways of doing it that it could last longer, or we could tell you that your budget is not nearly enough for what you want to do, right? But that's a lot of the infrastructures. A lot of times they just don't know what they have, and it doesn't make them bad or wrong or the worst people ever. It's not uncommon if it doesn't seem broken, so they don't put the investment into jetting out the sewer lines or flushing, turning valves, and things seem to be working. And then one day they start to learn the deficiencies they have, and they just don't have the resources to plan appropriately to fix those. Larger cities tend to have a better grasp on their existing infrastructure, what they have. The challenges there tends to be more layers of decision makers. Smaller cities, decisions can happen faster, but that's where the public education and trying to help your client make the best decision. At the end of the day, I just give recommendations. I don't make the decisions. For smaller cities, it's a little easier, but sometimes requires a little more, hey, this is what we're looking at, and this is why it's important. This is why it's not important. Here's the considerations. But the decision-making process can be a little faster. Larger cities, a lot of times they have more staff to kind of weigh those options for you, but there's a lot of layers to projects. to get things done. Then that goes kind of back to relationships with smaller cities, and you tend to have a lot closer relationships. I've got clients that call me 2 or 3, 4 times a day today, and I don't mind. I love working with them day to day and answering questions and solving problems because we're working together, and it's getting the system's getting better as we go forward. Larger cities, you don't have as many of those conversations, so sometimes those relationships are harder to develop. And so if you want to look at a project in a different light or different means or methods, it's a little harder to have those conversations. But that's the gist of those.
Something that I really enjoyed working with you. Naturally, I was working in some smaller communities and you were helping me with some projects. I tended to always try to think out of the box. And a lot of times you would at least have those conversations with me and tell me, hey, these things can work, or, this is just, impossible. When I look at some of the communities I've worked in and some of the things that I discussed with you, some of those things have happened over the years. Some of those pie in the sky ideas where you and I, bounce things back and forth and talk to those things through have happened. And they've really changed the dynamic for some of those communities moving forward. As you're working with city managers and public works officials and things like that, there's not a lot of engineers who have the ability to have those conversations and be supportive of that innovation. How do you keep that rolling to where you'll listen to somebody say something and they may have no idea what the engineering implications are in that, but you can come back and go, hey, let me deliver this to you in a way you can understand. But you don't do it in a way to kind of kill their idea. You let them know what's needed to achieve those things.
Well, I think first that's just kind of my realization that there's no dumb people working in our industry. Sometimes some of us do dumb things, but everybody brings a lot of opinions come from some kind of experience or knowledge. They've learned it from somewhere. There's always a reason why there's an opinion or an idea brought forth, and I want to make sure I understand. What are we trying to achieve, and where's that opinion coming from? And sometimes that opinion doesn't actually achieve what is best for the city, and then we'll kind of work through that avenue. Just kind of going loggerheads or head on and telling somebody that's not a good idea. At the end of the day, I don't operate the systems, so somebody's the boots on the ground operating it, or somebody's got to pay for it and explain themselves to residents, right? So it's really has to be a collaboration of all parties involved. Of hey, engineering wise, here's what I think works well. Whether we're looking at right now, or maybe it costs a little more right now, but here's the benefit down the road of where it will save you or operate better. But it still has to be engineered and constructed in a manner where the person that has the license to operate it can run it. If it doesn't work in reality, there's no point in trying to design it, trying to explain, hey, we're going to spend more money now, or why this costs what it does. The city manager wants what's best for the city. And I work in just the engineering world. The city managers, as y'all gonna test, have to worry about many more aspects of the city than just public infrastructure, making sure that they understand from maybe why it's important. And sometimes there's some give and take. Sometimes the project you want isn't reality at that time for considerations that have nothing to do with engineering. Okay, so what's the right project for the city? That's really what we're working towards. It's not whose idea is it or who gets the credit for coming up with a solution. It's what's right for the city.
Craig, Michael and I have both seen you present to council on a bunch of different issues related to infrastructure. So you get that front row seat to the leadership of a bunch of different cities. These are very important decisions. They also cost a lot of money generally, especially if you're there. It's probably some big deal. Talk to us a little bit about how that tenure of folks, and you got elected officials getting in and out of office, and of course, city administrators and public works directors, how long they last, especially in some of the small cities. Talk to us a little bit about the leadership that you see and the challenges there, especially with some of the smaller cities.
Yeah, as far as council presentations, those challenges aren't just with smaller cities. As you mentioned, between the election cycles every couple of years, and as y'all know, there's not a lot of certifications you need to be elected to city council. That doesn't make any of them dumb. Doesn't make any of them genius. They run the gamut, but they're all bringing their own experiences, whether they work in a different industry or just move to the area, whatever it is. So I try to take the same approach. The first thing I try to do as working with a city is I always try to go to the meetings where we have a topic on there, whether it's an engineering contract or a report or sending something out to bid or to be built. Because from a city manager's standpoint, there's only so much political capital they have. If they're trying to answer engineering questions for me, that's my conversation to have, and I don't mind. But typically, I just try to kind of the whys and whats. Why I'm there, what we're talking about. Why it's important, what I'm going to ask them to consider, right, and then try to set the expectations for what we're talking about. A simple example would be if we're doing a water and sewer impact fee report. That's very important, especially as you have growth coming into the city. So there's a lot of infrastructure you need to build. That's really a financial mechanism, right, to help a CIP plan, but it's not construction plans. So helping set expectations of what we're doing, what we're asking them to do, what we looked at, if they vote or if they consider and vote, that day or that evening on this issue, if something changes in the future, because things are always changing, what courses of action, how they could react at that time, is the expectations of, you have to do something perfect right now. That's pretty heavy for some people, right? So try to walk them through the expectations, but just why I'm there. Why am I here? What are we talking about? Why is it important? And a lot of times I have to ask them, this is what we're asking you to vote on, because some of the more innocuous things, water and sewer master plans, right? They're not really sure. Yeah, they sound great, but what do we do with them? So what are we asking them to do, and how are they used? And it's helping them understand the process and why it's so important to the city to have those in place, but then what they're going to get out of it, because not everything is a construction project.
Sometimes, a decision's made and you do your best to provide a best answer. And sometimes you're coming in, after some other firm that's made a decision and we've got to do a 180, or even maybe against your best advice, the city does a 180. What's the real cost to the taxpayer when we're not following through with those plans, or we're not giving a lot of forethought to those decisions, and maybe not paying attention or heeding the advice of the subject matter expert?
There's no magic number to that, right? I'm not there's elected officials that make the decisions. And so I do the best I can. Our ethos here is just do the right thing for the right reasons. I mentioned, it was a blessing when I came from land development to where I'm at now. Not making any presumptions for anybody in that world, but right now, just, what's in the city's best interest is all I care about. So when I go to bed at night, I sleep well, right? When an elected body makes a decision, at that point, that's the decision made. I still just do the best that I can. Sometimes I ask questions of things that may be pertinent, may not be. You all have experienced it. It runs the gamut. Sometimes conversations take place that you don't know how you got to where you're talking about what you're talking about, but you did still try to be respectful. At the end of the day, they're the decision-making body, and I'm there to provide them with the best information I can so that they make the decision they feel is best for the city. But also in the construction world, you find things all the time that nobody knew about. Sometimes things change, and sometimes that gets the more difficult conversation, especially in smaller cities that, maybe it's the first major infrastructure project, and you do all the engineering, you do all the due diligence, you do the best you can, and then you get in construction and you run into something that nobody knew was there. Then we've got to deal with working through some of those, because sometimes there are dollars associated with that, and it's never fun, but we were going to hit it no matter what. It was going to be there either way. Sometimes those are the harder conversations. But once the council makes a decision, or once we have direction, I work for y'all. That's in the day. It's not mine. So I do the best I can. I'm here to support you. I have very little ego in that. You're not painting my name on the water tower.
Craig, can I jump in here real quick and just, say that, I know you're a student of leadership. You and I and a lot of our friends in the municipal sector are consistently trying to grow ourselves to be better and better leaders. And so I love the journey that you're on. But when we talk about working with municipalities, when you have provided the best information you possibly can, and this comes from not only from the engineering, but also from the city management, and I'm sure, James, from the public safety world, you've experienced it too. But you give your best information, and maybe you're not even the only one that's giving that information, but maybe there's a collective that has done that. And you see, because of our political system, as great as it is, sometimes, they make the wrong decision. You do have to offer that support, and you're consistently, trying to support them because, they are the voice of the citizens, and they have the right to make that decision. But there's something that you have to really tune up in leadership to be able to do that, to set aside that ego and really be able to go, hey, I know that this is probably going to go really bad, but how do I make it the best possible, and not, let your ego get involved in that. And so, I love what you post on LinkedIn, and I know you're very thoughtful about that. But what do you think about, how do you as a person kind of tune that up or tune that down, or is that something you're aware of?
Oh, I'm very aware of it. I will say there is one hard stop with that question is, if a city makes a decision that I personally don't agree with, if I feel that it is a health, safety, welfare, like it is going to physically harm somebody, it's illegal, at that point, I do kind of have to take a stand to some degree, whether it's, terminating a relationship, which hasn't occurred, but, if there's an actual real impact where somebody could be injured or hurt or killed, or there's a hard stop. There's not well, that's what you decided to do, and I go along with it. If that's the case, I would never go along with that. And the second thing is, how do I remove myself? Is because I work with the cities. If it's the elected body that's making the decision, a lot of times I'm working with the public works department or the inspectors and the field guys, the boots on the ground, and they're not the ones that made that decision. A great example, there's a city, I was a handful of years ago, we designed a project. It was politically sensitive. It was a bottleneck in town. Kids were walking next to a very narrow roadway. We had to get right away from some original residents that were not happy about it. So very, very political. We designed it. We advertised it. The city at that time wanted to use a brand new bid advertising platform that nobody had ever used before. And we got one bidder and one bidder only. And they were not good. And so I went through there and I even told the city that I can't recommend them. I recommend that they do not select this and we go another route. The city council elected to move ahead with that contractor. They really wanted that roadway built. So at that point, it's getting built and it's my plans. And so it was a painful construction process, but the inspector in the city at the time is a real good friend of mine, similar to y'all. And so did the best we can because we know it's going to hurt, but we still want a good project out of it. It's still taxpayer dollars. It's still important to the safety of the residents and the kids walking along this road. And we just know that it's not going to be a great experience. Taking that same project a step further, as y'all experienced, there's a lot of turnover in the city. And just a few months ago, I got pinged in an email from a new person in that city wanting to know why the road was designed that way. What happened? Why is this is falling apart. That construction was bad. And okay, so trying to show that here's the path that's taken. This is what the city council decided to do. So that was the elected body at the time. And we went forth and attempted to conquer, but it was a painful process. But a lot of times the folks you work with day to day they're not the ones making decisions that the council is, and they also want what's best for the city. So in that regard, I enjoy working day to day with all my clients. So it's not that hard to remove it myself from the decision I disagree with, because once we're in motion, it is what it is.
Craig, one of the things that we hear all the time is grants. And I know it's not necessarily your specialty, but you work with cities and see how they're funding these projects. Can you talk us a little bit about what you're seeing cities be successful in? Are there a lot of grants for infrastructure? I know there's some, like low-cost loans and things like that, but what are you seeing actually out there in the world?
You said success, right? It might take me a few. Now, there are communities where there are some grants here in Texas, through the Water Development Board or some different avenues that are the only real means and methods that some cities can get to improve existing infrastructure. Those are not the most painless process right now the state has. They're very paperwork, bureaucratic, red tape heavy, but it's the avenue for some smaller cities. I've seen a number of cities, once they can get to the point with regards to revenue where they have options of grant, or maybe they look at COs or revenue bonds or your rate studies. Usually the grant options fall down the list pretty quickly, just due to the projects get more complicated, and honestly they get more expensive. From my end, it takes a lot more time to just administratively work through that grant process than working with the city. I know I work with some folks in Austin, some legislative side. They have a strong desire to get better on that, and I know they're the 2-year break from legislative session, so they're kind of strategizing, and that's one of the hot topics. Is as far as infrastructure money in Texas and workforce development, is how do they improve those processes so it's more open and more available to cities so it can be used. I know in the last cycle they had a lot of funding for it, and they didn't use some of that money because it was just hard to get through projects from an administrative level. They just couldn't get through their review and approval and funding fast enough. So hopefully that changes going forward. I'm trying to stay tuned into it. It is a necessary program for some communities, but can be difficult to work through.
Yeah, Craig, the other thing I really want to mention, since we have so many elected officials that listen to our podcast as well, there's kind of a concept out there that everything can be paid for with a grant. We just need to find a city manager or a chief executive that can just find that money. What I always tell those folks is, we had Austin Boese from the city of Jersey Village on, and he's the grant whisperer. And even if you have somebody like that on your staff where you can get in and really work on those grants are not a strategic plan. If you're going to look at your infrastructure, what your community really needs and how you pay for it, you should not bet the farm that you're going to land a grant that's going to pay for a majority of it or that's going to take care of it. You really need to have a financial advisor and an administrative team that can come in with a sound financial plan. Not that you forego the grants, sure, go for those, but you should be able to figure out a way to pay for what's really needed outside of that. And then if you get the grant, that's just a bonus on top of that. I know that you educate folks on that, but could you speak to that a little bit about when you're doing a CIP, you really need to work with somebody to figure out how to pay for it outside of the grant infrastructure possibly?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the grants, they are available, but if you are basing your public infrastructure plan on the funding of that grant, there's no way to be successful and stay on track as far as timing or funding. Even if you are successful to get the grant, it's probably not going to be on a time frame that you want. In my opinion, it is the most stable to set your budget up to where you can fund it yourself in whatever fashion it is for the city, but also having access to the experts that are familiar with the grant programs or the processes and pursue those. And so if you're able to successfully capture one of those, that's fantastic. Now there is an ability for the city to go do something else that affects the quality of life for the residents, right? So it's almost the added bonus. You should definitely pursue them, but when you bank on it, it's almost impossible to stay on track, and then you fall further and further behind on the rest of your infrastructure because you're waiting on the funding on that one aspect. And many times, depending if you're a smaller city growing or not growing, a lot of these grants don't pay for growth, right? They rehabilitate existing infrastructure for deficiencies today to serve your community, right? You've got tax-paying citizens today that there's deficiencies that we need to do better on. Well, they're not paying for the next neighborhood to come in, and we'll fix the residents while we're there. And so it's not an impact fee, so to speak.
Well, kind of dovetailing off that, one of the things that concerns me when I see councils talking about they want to lower their water rate, especially when there's all this growth coming in and things like that. And, I don't know how you feel about it, but, we've had this record inflation that's kind of, slowed down a little bit, but nothing gets cheaper. So like water rates and utility rates are always going to go up. And I don't know if you've seen a whole lot of systems that are just able to lower their water rates unless they were just set too high for some reason.
I've not seen a lot of that. No, I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to financial planning or strategizing, the utility fund has to be able to pay for itself. The cities that y'all have seen get in trouble are when you're constantly transferring revenue from the general fund over to the utility fund to support it. At that point, your property taxes are offsetting your utility bills, and it's not doing well. But in Texas, water supply is a hot topic. Prop 4, the last legislative session, the $1 billion a year for 20 years for public infrastructure on the water side, and a lot of it's earmarked for water supply. And so building water supplies is expensive. Water treatment plants are expensive. The transmission lines. So I don't see it getting any cheaper. The best thing the city can do is, do a rate study for your water and sewer, and they can actually tell you that this is what is appropriate to charge for your water and sewer. This is the actual cost. So you're not looking into a crystal ball and guessing. You got a study with actual numbers to defend yourself on, and be able to tell the residents that, hey, we studied this. Here's the numbers. Here's why it does actually cost that. But the costs are not going down. Water is becoming a hotter topic. It has been before the data center boom. It was a topic, right? And the data centers aren't helping that topic at all. But here in North Texas, they just built a new reservoir lake up in northeast part of the state recently, which is a great water supply, but that wasn't cheap. It took them 20 some years to do it. Water and sewer rates are unlikely to go down.
Well, thank you. Michael, before we close out, do you have any other thoughts or questions?
No, I really appreciate Craig's time, and I hopefully we can get him back on the program to talk about some of the other things and that he's doing to help communities out. But overall, Craig, I just really appreciate the things that we've worked on through the years and how much I've learned from you and grown from you, and truly appreciate your friendship and just all the ways that you impact the communities for the better.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me. I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I learned a lot from y'all as well. And yeah, there's a lot of challenges facing the cities today, and if there's people can just learn from each other, we can all do better together. So I appreciate the opportunity to share with you all and continue to learn.
Craig, if people have questions for you or they need BHC's help, what's the best way for them to either connect with you or find out more information?
They can just shoot me an email if you have a way to tag that, or I can read it off here if you'd like. But yeah, shooting emails the best. Don't call the office phone, because if you recall, I screen that one part of the time. So, but yeah, just the first initial C, then my last name, which is Kerkhoff, as in Frank, and it's at bhcllp.com.
Great.
I should write a little jingle with that or something.
There you go. Yeah, we'll definitely tag it in the episode notes so people have it.
I'll sing it next time.
And before we get off, do you have any final thoughts? Do you have any advice for leaders, either elected officials or city leaders, as they are stressing out about how to deal with their unique infrastructure needs?
I guess I have many thoughts. You and I talk, and you probably have to schedule too much time when I talk. So, it's a lot. I think that, the challenges of smaller and larger cities, they're very different. Smaller cities, some people outgrow their roles. A public works director for a smaller city, once it gets to a larger city, it may not be the same role. And those are hard conversations. And being able to respectfully have those, but recognize them, are important. And in larger cities, I see a lot of career advancement. A lot of people are afraid to make decisions, and so just having an open environment to be able to have conversations and respectful relationships and really help keep people on the same page so the right decisions are getting made.
Well, thank you. Michael, thanks for being with us today. And Craig, we definitely appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing your advice for everyone and your knowledge. For Clear, we want to thank everybody for listening, and we would encourage you to follow us on our LinkedIn page. Please visit our website to find the latest career opportunities, and we will catch you next time.